What I witnessed was Mary-Fran coming across the veil and scooping her son up out of his physical body. And they had this most exquisite reunion. And I was a little surprised by that because I could feel what it is that was going on between the two of them. And then, even more to my surprise,
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am here today with Dr. Taylor. He is the president of the Expanded Awareness Institute. So I'm really excited to have you here today. Thank you for joining me, Scott.
I really appreciate the invitation. I look forward to talking about love because, that's
Mhm.
all there is when you get outside of this human body.
Absolutely. So let's just dive in and maybe you could share with us about your shared death experience.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So, this happens a while ago, and it was 1981, and I'm in love with look at that theme right there. I'm in love with a woman. Her name is Mary Frances Randall. And Mary Frances and her son Nolan, who had just turned 7, were coming home from a day of sailing on Lake Washington in southern Minnesota. And on the way home, they were involved in a horrific car accident. And Mary Fran was killed outright. And Nolan sustained a mortal head wound. And luckily, we live in southern Minnesota and just not that far from the wonderful Mayo Clinic, and so both Mary Fran and Nolan got bundled up and rushed off to that clinic where they received just wonderful care. It took Nolan 6 days to make his transition, and that becomes important because that allowed Mary Fran's she was one of 9 kids, so this was a large family, and Nolan was the eldest grandchild, and so there was this convergence upon St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, and there were a lot of them because there were, the siblings and then their boyfriends and girlfriends and spouses, and aunts and uncles and mom and dad and friends and neighbors, and they all showed up to hold vigil with the family and with Nolan. So, because there were so many of us, what we decided to do was to divvy up the time with Nolan. It was a small room anyway, and we can't all be in there because there were 30 or 40 of us. So we said 2 at a time, and we would go in for shifts of 2 hours and be with him and tell him stories. And so, as it turns out, my shift was from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning of the 6th day that we were there, and I was sharing it with Mary Fran's oldest sister, Janny. And we got in and we had, his favorite storybook, and we read him stories, and we told him about what was going on with his his uncles, who had the waiting room where everybody was small. It didn't have a lot of furniture, and there was a lot of us, so the uncles had gone out throughout the Mayo system and swiped the cushions off the couches in the waiting rooms and brought them back and laid them on the floor so, we could have a place to be comfortable while we were waiting. Anyway, so we told him these stories and in general, just tried to keep his spirits up. Now, Nolan was in a coma, and he never did regain consciousness. But the nursing staff there was really clear with us that hearing is the last sense to go, with a person who is either in a coma or making their transition. So it's important to talk to them and to tell them about their surroundings and who's there, and just try to anchor them back into the physical world. Well, it gets to be about 4:45 in the morning, and Janny, who's an emergency room nurse, goes to the end of the bed and she picks up the chart and she looks at it. And then she looks at all the monitors that are surrounding him. And she holds out her hand to me and says, Scott, it's time for us to say goodbye. So the two of us grab chairs and we sit by Nolan's head and we tell him how much we care for him, how much we love him, and in particular, how hard he had fought to stay with us here in the physical world. But Janny did a wonderful thing. She told him that if his mother should come to pick him up, remembering she died 6 days before, that if Mary-Fran had come to pick him up, that it was okay for him to go with her and that we would still love him and care for him always. But if she wanted him to go with her, that was the right thing to do. And that ended it. It's 5 o'clock, and we now go into the waiting room, and the next shift comes in. Well, it wasn't, 45 minutes later, Melissa, that the the floor nurse came into the waiting room, woke us all up, and said, "He's he's starting to go, so it'd be appropriate for us to go into the room." So we all filed into this little hospital room. And as it turns out, I'm way at the end. And when I get into the room, it's already 4 or 5 deep around the bed. And I'm going, well, this is just silly. I mean, so I wound up sitting on a windowsill next to Mary Fran's youngest brother, Willie. And we just waited. And, all there really was to do was to stand there and, kind of be in a prayerful place and watch the heart monitor just do its thing, and then it decreased and decreased and decreased, and then when it flatlined, what I witnessed was Mary Fran coming across the veil and scooping her son up out of his physical body, and they had this most exquisite reunion, and I was a little surprised by that because I could feel what it is that was going on between the two of them. And then, even more to my surprise, after they had welcomed each other, the two of them then turned to me, came over to me, embraced me, and then the three of us left and went to the light. And when I entered into the light, it was the most wonderful, loving, embracing. It's just it's beyond words in terms of how connected you are to the love of the universe. But that was kind of really in the background. What was going on mostly was that the three of us were there and we had a chance to affirm our love and affection for each other. We had a chance to say our goodbyes. I was at work when the accident happened, so I was nowhere near, and so that was a lovely thing to be able to truly, you know, thank them for being in my life and thank them for being who they were. And then we just had a chance to hang out together for a while, and then it just felt complete. It it wasn't like, "See you later, Scott." It was more like, we've done what we need to do. We're in a good place. And then Mary-Fran and Nolan turned and walked further into the light. And I came back to my physical body there sitting on the windowsill next to Willie. So I'm going to pause just there for a second because that's like part A of the story. There's a part B too, but I thought maybe if you had some questions, that would that would be good.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing, Scott. And My heart goes out to you in the loss of both of them. I'm sure it's probably still difficult to talk about and remember that.
Um, well, A, it's been a long time, but maybe I should just do part B, and then my answer will make more sense.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So I'm up in the light with Mary-Fran and Nolan, and I come back into my physical body. So there's that reentry. But at the very same time, I was also, excuse me, let me back. So I was 100% with Mary-Fran and Nolan in the light, and I was 100% in the hospital room with other relatives. So I had didn't have a word for it then, but I do now. It's by location. I had 2 independent consciousnesses that were working independently and each fully present. And I know this, Melissa, because as I'm sitting there on the windowsill, my body is reacting to what's going on in the light, and it's ecstatic, it's joyful, it is beyond description the how wonderful it is to be in that light, and my face showed it. I had this huge grin on my face that was, if anybody in the room had looked at me right then, they would have misunderstood because, just moments before, Nolan had made his transition, and Mary Fran had just made her transition, 6 days before. So there was plenty to be sad about. And to have this exuberance show on my face, it just wasn't appropriate. So I did the only thing I could think of, and that was to cover my face with my hands and just sit there on the windowsill being present in the room and being present with Mary Fran and Nolan until until that part of me could come back and I'm now one person again and I could regain my composure, lower my hands, and be present with the other grieving relatives in the room and do the hugs and stuff that happen at such a tragic occasion. So it was important for me to sit with this a while. I didn't tell anybody about this for 15 years. I mean, it was so outside of my upbringing. I mean, I grew up in a mainline Presbyterian church. And let's just say that the lexicon of the Presbyterian church doesn't talk much about people crossing the veil and scooping, their child out of their body and having the ability to communicate, and let alone by location. I mean, it was just so apart from anything I could have imagined, let alone witness. It took me a long time to become accepting of what happened, and I had to do a lot of reading and research and discovery about what happened because I truly didn't have words to express. And for any of your viewers out there who are interested, very often there's lists of what happens in a near death experience, and always number one is that it's ineffable, which is a great English word that means there are no English words for this. And I didn't have the ability to describe what happened to me for the longest time. And even now, as I'm telling you this, it's a pale version. I'm doing the best I can, even after 40 years, but it was a pale version of what was what was going on for me. Part of my recovery was that I became intensely curious because I knew that if I had done this once, I could do it again. That if I could be with Mary-Fran and Nolan, I could do it again. I just had to figure out how.
Mhm.
And that took a really long time, but I did. I did figure it out. And so now I can be in active communication with Mary-Fran and Nolan when I want to be. And so it's yes, there was that tremendous loss of them not being in the physical. And it's mitigated by the fact that I can communicate with them
Mm.
and be with them and, and they with me and, send me words of advice, that kind of stuff. So, um, I, I appreciate that those condolences, and they're tempered by the fact
Mm.
that the ability to be there when I need it is still there.
Wow, that's incredible. So, I would love to hear more about that, about your journey to figuring out how to reach that state of consciousness and how to be able to communicate with them.
All right. So this sounds a lot more organized than it actually really was. But that whole idea of I knew, I knew that I could do it. If I did it once, I could do it again. So I didn't know where to start. So I decided what I'm going to do is visit the ancient sacred sites around the world, and maybe there's some kind of extra juju there, that will help propel me back into that space again. So I went to places like Stonehenge, and I went to Machu Picchu and to the Oracle of Delphi and to the Sphinx. And just looking for, just that extra boost of energy that might propel me in that way. And um, mostly it was just crickets, just like nothing. And I had great vacations, though. I got to tell you, that's a wonderful way to explore the world. And so, not doing well in that, I started going to places that were a little more active. So I went to like more cathedrals than you could shake a stick at. And same thing, beautiful, and you have this wonderful feeling of the presence of divinity, but it didn't get me where I wanted to go. I'd visited more cathedrals than
Right.
I could shake a stick at, but that really didn't do it. And so then I stepped it up something a little more active, and I studied shamanism in South America. Studied with the Emoto religion in Japan. I went to seminary. I did meditation techniques. I started with TM, and then I found the Monroe Institute, which it has a very unique meditative style that uses binaural beats to help the brain and our energetic body enter into the non physical universe. And it was there that I was able to make my connection, enter into expanded states of awareness. And, there was Mary Fran and Nolan, and I established connections. And then I said, well, shoot, if I'm up visiting them, who else can I go visit? What else is up here? And that just led to all kinds of wonderful opportunities to explore the non-physical universe. But it was that deep searching that and books and just trying to figure out what happened. And it turns out that, this has happened to a lot of people. And the very last phase of that was that I entered into a doctoral program at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. And for those of you that don't know St. Thomas, it's Minnesota's largest private university. And there I studied leadership. And as my time for dissertation came, I proposed that I study people who had near death experiences. And when I was reading about people who had visited and come back, I discovered that they're buried in the literature in a little book by PMH Atwater. There's a paragraph that says sometimes people bedside will, when the person making the transition leaves, the person bedside will leave their physical body and go with them into the light and have an experience. And then it was called near death like experience. And then later, Raymond Moody, the guy who actually coined the term near death experience, coined another term, which is called shared death experience. And that's now what's used in the academic literature about what happened to me. Because, I was just sitting on a windowsill. Near death experiences typically, not always, but typically involve so much trauma to the physical body that, the non-physical body leaves, goes out and has an adventure, and then comes back to the physical body. And let me just say that is a terrible way to be introduced to the non-physical universe because the effects of the physical trauma, you know, tend to stick around. It takes a long time to heal, and there are kindler, gentler ways to do it now. So, shared death experience is what the term is that has been used for people who go with those who are making their transition, and they can witness it or they can be an active participant in it. Like for me, I was an active participant because I was in communion with both Mary-Fran and Nolan. And some people, you know, go right along with the folks who are going through their death process. And so they'll go down the tunnel with them. They'll be there at the reunion. They'll be able to participate in the life review and maybe go off to the healing and regeneration centers, so they can get kind of back into what it's like to live in the non physical. So, you know, experiences can be brief or they can be long and extensive. And it's a relatively new field of study. It's only, I think, William Peters' book came out like 3 years ago
Mhm.
at Heaven's Door. So it's kind of new onto the scene in terms of the academic research and the validity that is being placed on that experience.
Right. Well, I have a question for you going back to your shared death experience and then a follow-up question. W
Go for it.
So with people who have near-death experiences or any type of spiritual experience, there can be differences in the quality of the experience where some people will physically leave their body and experience a really almost physical higher dimensional realm. And others, it may be more of an experience of pure consciousness where they don't necessarily see anything. So with your shared death experience, where was that on the spectrum?
So that's a really good question because what it brings up is, what's the difference between an NDE or an SDE,
Mhm.
near death or a shared death experience, and a spiritually transformative experience?
Right.
And which many of us have had. You walk through the woods and all of a sudden there's this unity feeling and, you're transported and the rocks start singing. It's quite an event. Well, this comes from PMH Atwater, and she talks about the dividing line between the two of them as being, did you touch the light? And if you did, it tends to fall into the category of near death or shared death experience. If you didn't, it falls into the category of spiritually transformative experience. And the reason that there's this line of demarcation is that with a near death experience, the longer that you've the longer that you've been away from the experience itself, the more that you begin to understand. It begins to unfold, meanings develop. It becomes more central to who you are as a human being the longer you are. and you begin to live from that space more and more every day that you encountered when you were in the non-physical universe. Spiritually transformative experiences, however, tend to degrade over time. You don't remember them as clearly. They certainly become less important, and you don't tend to live from that memory of the rock singing. So there's a real split there. And the key element is, did you touch the light? And it can be for a microsecond or it can be for a really long time. And it doesn't make any difference which of the colors of light that you encountered. Near death experiencers tend to either encounter the white light, which you see a lot of. I mean, it's in all the movies, and the white light at the end of the tunnel, and it's really bright, and you can barely see because it's you know so present. There's black light, which is, most experiencers call it the source. It's where everything comes from. It's where all things are before they become manifested. And so it's a place of pure love and connection. Many of the people who've had a blacklight experience describe it as the womb of God. Isn't that lovely? So it's this place of birthing. And the last one, which is the kind I had, is called a clear light experience. And clear light is like, okay, if we're having this, you and I are talking and we're having a clear light experience, what we would see is that everything, this microphone and this pop filter and my books and me, we would all being exuding this love of the universe. That the love sign behind you, the books on your shelf, everything would emanate its own light because it is made up of that love, which is the foundation of the universe. We're all made up of the same stuff, just rearranged differently. But that's what a clear light experience is. It's a it's a recognition that everything is the light of the universe. And it's quite ecstatic and wonderful. So I hope that explains it some. What I found in my research is that people tend to get the experience that they need.
Right.
And in my case, all I had to do was to be in the light with Mary-Fran and Nolan, communicate with them, reaffirm, say our goodbyes, and that was enough. And, it totally transformed who I was. And, I was at peace with where they were going and who they were as non-physical beings. And yeah,
Yeah,
good
I
to be there.
really love that explanation. You're a near death experience researcher, I saw in your bio. So it's really interesting that you can break it down, the different experiences like that. I've also heard I think the black light experience that you were talking about, is that the experience that people commonly call the void?
Yes. Hmm. Yes. And that void experience is it's the this is it's ineffable again. It's hard to
Yeah.
describe because it's about entering into a place of void, but that does not mean it's nothing.
Mhm.
It means that it's filled with the potential of the universe. It's like unmanifested potential. It's all just there, waiting to come forth. The times that I've been able to enter into the void, I describe it as being able to take myself out on a date because
Mm.
it's just me. There's no future, there's no past, there's no Scott as husband or uncle or whatever. It's just me right then. It's I call it the place of I am. And you've heard about that from, biblical references that God describes God as I am. And it's being able to enter into that space and just be. And then at some point, other things come in and you realize that you are a part, you're a something, you have a physical body, and then just out you go. But that void space is spectacular. It's
Mm.
just so wonderful to know that we are and that we are love, that we are the vibration of love, and we come from that void space. Yeah, I like it.
There may be some people listening who would love to have an experience like this for themselves. Maybe somebody has passed on in their life and they would love to be able to connect with them or just have those expanded consciousness states. Um, what advice would you give them to, after all of the searching that you did to finally be able to access that? How could you break it down for people?
So, um, I found that doing meditations assisted with binaural beats is really helpful. And I was a facilitator for the Monroe Institute. So I went there, learned the technique, then taught for them for 35 years, and then for 2 years was their executive director. And it's an extraordinary place to learn, you know, come in. I mean, I went in as a baby. I didn't know anything. And and, and they have a nice program to lead you through it. And well, after I left Monroe, I did the same thing, only I did it with the lens of the near death experience. So instead of using the cosmology of Bob Monroe, who, was a pioneer in exploring the non physical universe and discovered it a certain way, I used well the well-trodden paths, yeah, of people who've had near-death experiences or shared death experience, because there's a real commonality about how people experience it, and so that's what those albums are in the background. Um, about how you can enter into that space, and if you really wanna talk to, your dead relatives, well, I got, some exercises in there to do that with. I also happen to really like the Shift Network, the Shift Network. I have taught courses there on my technique, which is the bilocation technique. Remember I told you about that, where
Yeah.
I was with Mary-Fran and Nolan and I was in the hospital room. Well, it turns out that's really easy to learn, really easy to learn. And so you don't have to do out of body stuff. You can be in your physical body and you can be in the non physical universe at the same time. And it allows you a lot more flexibility. And boy, it's really nice to have a guide. That's what I like about Monroe. That's what I like about the work that I do and the work that I do with Shift. And, there are other people out there who do binaural beats, sacred acoustics. They're out there. That's Eben Alexander and his group. And so they've got another way that they use binaural beats, but I think it's really helpful to have that assistance because it gets you there very quickly. You don't have to sit 20 years looking at a wall. You can you can get at it right away, and then it's helpful to have a guide who says, "Okay, do this and then turn left, and then after you're done that, turn right and X, Y, and Z, and there you go." This is a long way to say one of the advantages of binaural beats is that you don't need them forever. You put the headphones on, you listen, you learn how it works, and then take the headphones off. You never need them again because you've learned what it feels like to be in that state. And we have a tremendous ability as human beings to remember and go, "Oh, yeah, I remember what it was like when I talked to my dead grandma Jenny, what that felt like, where I was." And then you just go, and it's that easy. So I like it. It's safe and it's very effective.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for making this available. I'm definitely going to check out your CDs. I have one more question for you if you have time.
Of course, we have time.
So, you've mentioned that you've been able to contact Mary-Fran and Nolan since they passed. And I heard you in another interview sharing some of those experiences that you had with them. Is there any experience that stands out to you that you'd like to share?
So, yeah, Nolan in particular, it's interesting. In the 40 years, Mary Fran shows up for a little bit and she goes away and she comes back and we reconnect and then she goes away. Nolan, on the other hand, has always been around. I'm feeling right now. He's like right there. And so we have active conversations about all kinds of things. And one of the lovely things about doing this work is that we are outside of time and space. Nolan and I, our meeting place, I close my eyes and I picture a park bench like you would find in Central Park, wooded slats with the early things on the end. And I sit down there, and then Nolan comes and he sits down next to me. And sometimes he'll show up as 7 years old, just like when I last saw him. Sometimes he's middle aged, sometimes he's, the age he would be now. And so it depends on what it is that he wants to talk about that we do, that's how he shows up. So there was a case. There was a situation where I sat down and Nolan shows up and he's in his early 30s and he's dressed in a black suit, white shirt, narrow black tie, that tie clip that's you wear too high, So I think that I'm getting the sense that he's living a life right then in the 1950s because it kind of has that feel to it. And he has a briefcase and it's on his lap and he opens up the briefcase and inside the briefcase there's a gun. And he goes on to explain that his job is something that's similar to US Marshal. You wear regular clothing and you're assigned duties. And he had recently had to shoot and kill somebody in the line of duty, and it was tearing him up. He'd been trained, he'd been, psychologically set up to be able to do that work. And when the situation came, he was defended himself and he did what he was supposed to do. But what he didn't fully get was the impact that it would have on him taking another life, even if he was defending himself. It was this really rather unique situation where the two of us could sit there and have a discussion like father to son about what that means and how to look at it through different lenses and how to live with that, how to be with that, because it will always be part of his past. And so I it made me feel really valued that Nolan would come to me with that kind of a conundrum in his life. And it also taught me that we can be in touch with others outside of time and space. So we don't have to think linearly about, is he here? Is he grown up? Is he, 4 years old now? It doesn't work like that. It's like you can touch in at any point in any lifetime and get help and advice, including on ourselves. So it's yeah, so that's a story that I hold dear to my heart because it meant a lot to me that we would have this ability to talk and the ability to kind of work things out as best we could. I'm not a trained counselor, so it was really about two people who care for each other and be yeah. So I was there for him, and that meant a lot.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Scott. And I'd like to give you a chance to share with the viewers where they can find you.
Bless your heart, Melissa. Thank you. Um, go to my website, which is Near Death Meditations, plural, neardeathmeditations.com. And there's stories about me and there's videos and links to all kinds of things. You can also find me on theshiftnetwork.com, where have taught classes in bilocation and they're on demand. You can take them any old time you want. I'm in the middle of teaching the advanced class right now. It's a 18-week beyond advanced on how you can use bilocation for all kinds of exploration work in the non-physical world using the NDE as still using that as a model, and it works really well. So those are the two teaching ones, and the albums are at hemi-sync.com, but you can also get them on my website. So neardeathmeditations.com. Thank you, Melissa. What a wonderful conversation we had today.
Yes, I really enjoyed it. And I also want to say that I think what you're doing is absolutely wonderful. The fact that you took this experience that you had and now you've made it accessible to other people and are helping other people to have a similar experience. Thank you so much for the work you're doing, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. Have best wishes with it. All the love, right?
Right back at you. Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, share this video with your friends, and comment with your thoughts and opinions. And check the description box for the links to my TikTok and Instagram, where I share the more personal side of my life, my website, where I share my paintings and merch, and also the Be a Guest link for anybody who's interested in sharing their story. Be loved, be happy, be at peace, and thank you for watching.